Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I have my microphone back on today. My fiance did some tinkering over the weekend and fixed it. So hopefully there won't be any static and it'll pick up sound and everything as normal. Still a work in progress learning all of this audiovisual tech stuff. Anyways, today I want to talk about people living in their cars. I noticed a trend on Google Trends where this has steadily been picking up over the years, and I've been seeing different content creators in my YouTube feed posting TikToks and compilations of people talking about living in their cars. And I even did a search myself and found a lot more information was available on YouTube about living in your car than what I had access to when I lived in my car back in 2021. So I want to talk about this because there seems to be a correlation with people interested, clearly, like they're searching for it at higher rates than they have in the past, but people living in their cars, and the cost of living, I think people recognize that it's gotten, you know, way too expensive. And just to give you a perfect illustration, this is my car when I lived in it. Like I said, I lived in it from the end of 20 to 2021. I did a huge trip around the country, and I ended up working part time for the summer in Jackson, Wyoming. I had honestly, okay, this might make me sound really stupid, but I don't ski, so I don't know anything about ski resorts out west. I had no idea what Jackson Hole was. I just remember I got to Yellowstone National Park and then Grand Tetons in about mid-June 2021, and I literally came to a fork in the road. I'm not even exaggerating here. I had a choice between turning left and heading east through Wyoming or turning right and going to downtown Jackson. So I took the right-hand turn. I was like, well, why not go check it out? And I stayed for 3 months because they needed workers desperately, and I basically was my own self-contained accommodation, so I could pick up a bunch of jobs while I lived in my outback, and I had a parking permit and everything. So it actually turned out to be a really good situation. But this is my car. I worked at the rec center, the Teton County Rec Center, and so that gave me the parking permit to basically legally live in their garage, their parking lot. But then because I worked there, I had access to the showers, so I had, you know, all my basic needs met, and then I'd work around town. But this is a Hidden Hollow apartment complex. So this is my car parked in the parking lot, and then there's a road, and then the apartment complex. And if you're not familiar with Jackson, Wyoming, it is one of the most expensive places to live in the country. And during COVID, this was particularly true because people who had the means to do so were fleeing big cities and they were moving to places like Jackson, and who wouldn't? It's absolutely beautiful there. But this apartment complex was supposed to be affordable housing in Jackson. Jackson has a huge housing crisis. There's a finite amount of land to build on. A lot of it is very expensive, very wealthy land. You have multi-million dollar ranches. So there isn't really single family housing, much less apartment buildings. So there's nowhere to house the workforce that lives there. That's why there are so many jobs, and I could pick up a bunch and kind of work at my discretion, because I wasn't handicapped by housing. But there's no housing, and it's whatever housing is there is super expensive. So this is me living in my car, and that is Hidden Hollow apartment complex. And this is just to give you an idea. A one bedroom starts at 2560. And if you've ever lived in one of these luxury apartment buildings, you know that's not the actual price. Once you tack on utilities and amenities fees, and you're probably going to need a parking permit and all that kind of stuff, this is probably closer to $3,000 a month for a one bedroom. And I did see on Zillow there was one for rent that was 4,700. That was a three bedroom, I believe. So you're usually looking at something much more expensive. And at least in 2021, this was the case. I'm not sure if it still is. There were waiting lists for these apartment complexes. So even if you had the money to spend, there weren't necessarily available units for you to access. And so a lot of people were doing what I did, living in a car, and they were like living on sofas and stuff. And I got to actually see this firsthand because by working at the rec center, all the people who were like me, who were living in cars, living in vans, living on the national forest and all, land and all that kind of stuff, they were showering at the rec center. So I got to meet these people. I got to see who they were, and befriended a few of them who just we would chit chat, and they would come in regularly. But they were average people. There was a couple I worked with. I was on a hot air balloon chase crew, which is a fantastic story for another time. But we would basically launch and chase hot air balloons on a working cattle ranch. But there was a couple who lived in a van. They basically lived in the forest, but they would come to the rec center. They would shower. So a lot of the service industry workers who are providing the services that make Jackson Hole so appealing to tourists, they're living in vehicles too. And this is such a great juxtaposition of, you know, a van, someone, or, you know, in my case, an Outback, but a place someone was living and a place behind it where people really can't afford to live. And I think that's kind of encapsulates like what people are really struggling with right now, and why we're seeing a growing trend towards people living in their cars, not necessarily so much for like travel, kind of like what I was doing, but more out of necessity, because they've just literally been pushed out of the housing market. And every housing market is different. So some places are going to be more expensive than others, and sometimes you can't control it. And so I wanted to dive into this video by Zach Rios that talks about how people are living in their cars and figuring out how to manage their money during the housing crisis that we're in.
Through the roof, many have turned to renting, but now that has become priced out of many people's budgets. So we're seeing a growing trend of people becoming homeless, living in their vehicles to survive. I wanted to go more in depth with this and what it entails, because I think some would just believe it's similar to van life and being able to travel around and see the country. But there are many problems and examples we're going to see today, along with some of your comments from previous videos. So if you want to be featured on a future video, leave it in the comments down below.
I really appreciate him opening this up by talking about the juxtaposition with van life. I personally, now that I'm looking back at it in my own experience and how Instagram shaped my perception of reality, I do think van life was the millennial solution to the economy, the immediate consequences of the new economy that took shape after the global financial crisis in 2008. I don't think we've actually come to terms with what happened. I think it's delayed. So like we're now dealing with the consequences of it today. But I don't think we really understood, especially for young people, what was happening. And so you had a handful of people who converted vans, lived in them. And this is something, to be honest, niche groups of people have been doing for a while now. If you're a rock climber, you know this. A lot of rock climbers live in vans and have for a really long time. So the fact that van life went mainstream on Instagram isn't necessarily because it was this novel new thing. It's just something a group of people picked up from other like niche groups of people, and then brought it to social media and figured out how to capitalize on it and spread it. But regardless, van life gained traction, and I think that was a way for millennials to come to terms with the housing situation we were in, the economic situation we were in, and not call it what it is, which is homelessness or houselessness, if you want to use that term. We made it look cool. And I was part of this, right? Because I lived in a car and I traveled, right? But I also was houseless. Now I think Gen Z is calling a spade, and other people too, who are not just Gen Z, but I think Gen Z is helping push it because they're a little bit more candid than millennials are. But I think Gen Z in particular is calling a spade and recognizing that the proliferation of people living in vehicles is a direct consequence of the housing crisis that we're in. So I think my generation saw tiny homes and van life, and we made it cool. We made it something like aspirational, something you wanted to do. And I think now we're starting to kind of pull the veil away from it and call it what it actually is, which is houselessness.
Well, we're going to start off with a comment from one of you guys. It's crazy how much things have changed. Everything is getting more expensive, rent, food, and gas. Feels like no matter how much you make, it's never enough. People are literally living in their cars, trying to go off-grid just to survive. I think that's a good transition into the first clip.
So let me get this straight. We can't afford rent because rent prices are increasing so much to push us out to buy homes. But the interest rate is so high, you can't buy a home. And also you're not going to get funded for a home because of your debt to income ratio. So then what? And then homelessness or houselessness is becoming criminalized. So then what? I don't understand.
And because of those exact reasons, we'll even see later in the video talking about getting in trouble being homeless. We'll see clips like this on screen, thinking about living in my car and showering at the gym. The cost of rent is too high right now. And we could take a look at an example of somebody doing exactly this.
I live in my 2006 Honda Accord, and this is what it's like to wake up in a 24-hour Planet Fitness parking lot. I start by getting dressed, and then the longest part of my morning routine is always taking down all of my window coverings, but they are essential for sleeping in my car, so I do it anyways. Then I climb over into the driver's seat and take down my window coverings there. I actually already went into this Planet Fitness last night to take a shower, for all of you who say that I don't shower. So this morning I can go ahead and leave straight away and drive to Panera Bread. But first, the bathroom, obviously. I used the restroom and washed my hands. I brushed my teeth in my car. I don't know, like, that's weird to show on camera. I don't know why y'all are asking to see that. Anyways, now it's time to drink my hot bean juice to wake up and get some computer work done.
So overall, I don't think this is the
Okay, so this is literally exactly what I did. I had a Planet Fitness gold, or was it Black Card membership. So you can go to any Planet Fitness in the country for about like 25. I pay $27 right now for mine, but I think back then it was like 25 bucks a month. But you could go to any Planet Fitness in the country. And then I don't know if Panera is still doing this, but back in 2021 they also did their coffee membership program. So it was $9.99. So basically 10 bucks a month for unlimited coffee. So I would literally do this exact routine. I would go to Planet Fitness, shower, workout, and then I would go to Panera and drink coffee. Panera always got me though because I was always hungry, and it was like I found food. Um, Doing food in a car was really difficult. Like I had all the equipment for it. I had bought a Yeti, had a camp stove. Like could easily have done meals in my car. There are a couple of reasons why I didn't. One, like the cost of a bagel at Panera was just so cheap, and just more convenient. And I don't know. This is something I've always felt, and I'm getting over this as I get older. But I always felt like a nuisance going to coffee shops and Paneras and stuff and just drinking coffee and knowing that I had gotten the coffee basically for free because I was on the monthly, $10 a month plan. So I didn't want to be a loiterer. So I always defaulted and bought like a bagel or something. But then I always, and then this might just be a thing that's unique to me. I always ascribed my existence in society with creating social proof for myself that I existed. So one of the only ways I could find to participate in society was to go out to eat, even if I wasn't hungry. So this, I became acutely aware of this when I got to Santa Monica. I had tons of food in my Yeti, like salad stuff. I'd paid for parking on the beach, and I really should have just eaten what I had in my cooler and just sat on the beach. But I craved to exist in society and be recognized as existing so badly that I went to a Shake Shack in Santa Monica and got I love Shake Shack, so I got my usual shroom burger, and I just remember sitting and eating there, and it was just like empty, and I was like, why did I just spend $20 at Shake Shack when I have food in my Outback and I'm not even hungry? And it really just dawned on me in that moment that I was like, oh, okay, I spent this money that I didn't really have because I wanted to feel like I existed. And I think the way women especially feel like we exist in society is by spending money and participating in the culture around us. And unfortunately, the culture around us means spending money. I think men are a little bit different. They're wired differently and can handle being alone and on their own for days, months, weeks, years on end. They don't need to swipe a card at Panera or get a Starbucks latte to prove they exist. But for women, there's a tribal aspect to it, and because our tribal society is very much like Clueless, if you're familiar with that movie, this idea where you have to spend and participate in consumer culture to be part of girl culture. That was just deeply ingrained in me, so I ended up spending way more money than I needed to. But yeah, this is exactly the routine I did.
ideal situation for everyone, but it doesn't really seem that horrible because they just end up showering in a gym and then they go to Panera Bread to be able to work on the computer. In the end, that still cost money, as we're going to see a little bit later, and this is definitely not the same situation that everybody's going through.
Your girl is freezing. So normally I just put on a hoodie and I have my t-shirt blanket that I use to sleep in, and I've been okay. If I wake up cold, I normally just turn the heat on in the car for like 5 minutes, turn it off, and go back to sleep. But it is 50 degrees outside. And my hair is still wet because I washed it after I went to the gym. So we're pulling out the 20-degree sleeping bag. This is what it looks like. Let's unzip it. The sleeping bag is about to my stomach, but honestly, this is already a lot warmer. Until my hat, gloves, and other warmer blanket comes, just gotta do it. Good night, y'all.
And this is when it starts to become not nearly as fun as some people might think, having to sleep in freezing cold temperatures, and there's nothing you can really do other than bundling up, along with finding a place to park your
Yeah, so I encountered that as well. I started my trip in November of 2020. So like my first couple nights, I started in New York, so I was heading south, and it was definitely cold. I had some like 27-degree nights, and I did have a good 0 degree sleeping bag, so that definitely helped. But that's something you don't think about when you do this, and I can see how folks living in it full time in a fixed location, this could be difficult. When you're doing it as like a digital nomad and traveling, you can move with the seasons, which is what I did. So you go in the south during the winter, and then you go north during the summer, and that's kind of how you beat the heat. But I know that's not available to everyone. So depending on where you live and where you're doing this, it can be utterly unbearable. Either in the summer, it's just too hot, or in the winter, it gets really cold. And I mean, you get used to it eventually, but like waking up in 50-degree uh, temperatures, it's just like it doesn't seem that cold, right? It's not like freezing cold, but I don't think most people would choose that. I think if you had an option, you'd maintain a climate controlled house with decent heat levels, and it gnaws at you after a while. It does.
Your car, because a lot of places will end up calling the cops on you and they'll show up and you'll have to move. So we'll talk a little bit about stealth camping later in the video, but I do have a comment from one of you guys. When I was homeless and living in my car, I didn't qualify for EBT because I made too much money on my minimum wage grocery store job. And then I had to check out this woman who'd use her food stamps to buy junk food, then use cash to buy 100 plus in alcohol. Then we'd help her out to our car, which was a brand new Cadillac Escalade. This comment was from the welfare fraud video that I made, showing many people taking advantage of the system, and some people who are legitimately homeless weren't able to qualify, while people with $80,000 SUVs were able to get a whole bunch of crap food for free. Here we have another example of one of the difficulties you'd probably think of if you were living in your car 24/7.
I take care of my cat in such a small car. I have a litter box. Wow. I have some smell good baking soda. And as you all know what this is, the toilet. When I pull up to a car wash, it's a good area to have some privacy with this door here. And I just lift this up and I take my scoop and I scoop it. And it's the best way to do it if you want privacy.
I can't imagine traveling
this
with a
toilet
cat.
I could show on the other side, but I put it in the middle and I use that inside the vehicle when I need to. It comes in handy when you have IBS. All my shoes are kept down here. It's a good way to keep all storage away from the front, out of the way, out of sight.
I don't know how much storage I'd want to put under the mobile toilet. And along with having a pet, we've seen a couple times on previous videos, especially if you're in a tough situation like having to live out of your vehicle, having a pet on top of it probably isn't the best idea, at least in my opinion. Of course, the cost to keep it alive. I mean, pet food is definitely not cheap, and having it cooped up in a car or a truck or wherever you are is probably not the best situation. We have another comment from one of you guys. I've been living in my car since June and it's rough. I was living with my dogs, but one went missing and the other one is now with a foster family, thankfully. I was able to beat my eviction in court because of the fact that the company was evicting so many people at once that they couldn't keep up and just took what they could get. Really crazy times to be living in. I don't know the entire situation, but I do know that there are some areas that are constantly bringing up the rent, the giant conglomerates that own tons and tons of apartment buildings, thousands of units. They're just trying to kick people out as much as humanly possible to get a higher end tenant in their building to pay even more money so they could get even more profits. And again, having a pet while you're cooped up in a vehicle seems like a pretty tough situation.
I do want to frame the housing crisis a little bit differently, because I think most people are taking the easy road out. They're like, oh, they're just like evil corporations who are trying to get as much profit off people as possible. That's definitely happening. I'm not saying that's not happening, but that's not really how a lot of luxury apartment buildings are designed. So you just have to think about the economics of it, right? If you have a football field worth of land to build on, first, what is more economical to build? A single family home, or a 4+1 apartment complex. We have retail on the bottom and then 4 levels of apartment buildings on top that you can generate rent off of. What's more economical? One home, or even 2 homes maybe, that sell for $500,000 a piece, or a piece of real estate you can continuously generate rent off of, both in terms of the residential tenants, but also the commercial tenants, right? So that's part of the problem. That's why you're seeing a lot of apartment buildings come up, especially luxury apartment buildings, because then you can charge a higher premium per square footage. So in that regard, yes, there is profiteering to get as much maximization out of housing as possible. But the other problem with this that isn't really talked about is the people who build these apartment complexes aren't the people that own them and hold them for the long term. So there's this whole secondary derivative market, especially in real estate and with debt and mortgages, and that's what caused the 2008 financial crisis. If you think back to that, there's this whole entire secondary market that most of us are completely oblivious to just because we don't work on Wall Street. But you have people who build real estate assets, so like those luxury apartment complexes, they sell them to someone else, and then that company or whoever manages them, they're the ones who are responsible for generating revenue from them. And so they don't see it as an investment. They see it, it's an asset that can generate recurring revenue. Well, okay. So it is an investment, but it's not the same investment as someone who is building it, if that makes sense, right? And so every time it changes hands, there's, people who have invested in the debt associated with this, because there's financing that's involved with all this. So you have other people who are investing in the debt that's involved with it. And a lot of times some builders will choose to build unprofitable buildings to offset some of their other costs in their portfolio. And so, yeah, they're trying to maximize rent. And in some cases, they're probably trying to keep up with like the market rate. But in other cases, like they don't actually care. Their goal isn't to fill the apartment complexes. They're not thinking like a capitalist would think, like someone who's trying to maximize profit off of something. If you, an average person, say you buy a house and you want to rent it on Airbnb and you're starting your own little investment, cottage investment side hustle, like your goal is to maximize as many days booked on the platform as possible, right? So what I'm saying is apartment complexes and the companies that manage them don't think of it like that, because they're more focused on the debt and the asset side of things. They don't actually care about the property itself. And so they can charge whatever rents they want. And if there's demand to meet those rents, then great, that's fine. If they're not, then they can lower and incentivize things. But they're not actually trying to fill these apartment complexes. And then what happens is once you get in, they're not actually supposed to be sustainable housing, because once you get in, okay, you're locked in, you're disincentivized from moving. So I'll give you an example. I lived in one of those luxury apartment complexes when I moved to Austin. Had a 2-bedroom, and they gave us a deal, and they didn't tell me why we got a deal. I had a roommate who I split the rent with, but we got a deal because they were doing major construction at the apartment complex, and the pool was closed for the entire duration we lived there. So in Austin, Texas, like it gets hot in the summer. I was kind of looking forward to having a pool, but didn't have access to it. They were doing other construction throughout the building as well. So like the quality of life wasn't as good. So they gave a discount in order to get us in. So it was a 2-bedroom. I think it was like $2,800. But then split 2 ways, that's $1,400 a month. But then after all of the amenities fees and trash and all like these mandatory fees you have to pay to live there, like water, for example, they had another company manage the water, but we didn't have a choice to choose who we paid for water. We had to pay this company to do it, and we had to pay whatever they told us to pay. Like that was just that. And so it ended up being between $1,500 to $1,600 a month after all the fees, parking, amenities, all that kind of stuff. But then when it came time for renewal, the rent jumped up to I think like $3,200 a month, which if you're familiar with the Austin housing market right now, like it's completely collapsed. Like there's so many people with homes for sale. It's unbelievable. So if an apartment is raising your rent, it's insane, because there's a bunch of other apartment buildings, new buildings that have just been put up and open, that have all these wonderful like perks and stuff. They'll give you free rent for like 2 months. Like you can just move, right? And I think what these apartment buildings do is they know there's a hassle involved with moving, and so they can keep jacking up the rents because they know you're not going to move. And then while they're doing this, it kind of tests the market. So if you're willing to pay, like if I said, okay, well, we were at $2,800, now I'm willing to pay $3,200 if I'd stayed there, like that is a market indicator for the management firms who are operating these apartment complexes. And again, like I was saying before, they're not looking at this as housing. They see it as part of their portfolio, and they're invested in a leveraged asset, something that has taken on debt. And there's people who have invested in that debt as well in the secondary derivative market. So the people who are managing housing in the United States right now and the pricing of housing are more interested in how it relates to the investment products in their portfolio, not the actual housing costs itself. So they're completely divorced from the realities of you and I. So I hope that makes sense. But I wanted to nuance that, because everyone thinks, oh, they're just all these evil corporations who are buying houses. And in some cases, yeah, there are. BlackRock, they're definitely out there. But it's not like the people in the management office of these firms are like sitting there like Scrooge McDuck counting numbers. There's a different game they're playing, and we're just pawns in that game, and we don't realize it. And we're seeing housing prices go up, and we don't understand why those housing prices are going up. And it really has little to do with the cost of housing itself and more about realizing gains on real estate-based investment products that a lot of these firms are invested in, or in some cases, harvesting loss revenue off of some of these assets as well.
Another one that I think people don't realize could be a huge problem.
I live in my car. I'm stuck in South Carolina. This is update number 5 or 6, but I have an alternator that is draining my battery apparently. But the thing is, if I keep an auto zone every hour on my way home, if possible, to check the battery percentage, and then I can charge it before I leave and keep charging it on my drive, do you guys think that I'll make it to Virginia to where I can get my alternator for just $400? Do you think that would be worthy? Because I feel like that would be great, instead of the quote of $1,400 that I was quoted here in South Carolina by the same dealerships. So please, someone give me some advice here. Do you think that would work?
Having these types of problems seem terrible to me. If you don't have a whole ton of money right now and you're living in a vehicle that's older just to be able to survive, chances are it might not be super reliable. So you could have things going wrong like this. I mean, $1,400 and then mapping out a plan to hopefully be able to go to a different state where you could get it for cheaper. You could even make the argument if you have a newer vehicle. We've seen time and time again how unreliable brand new vehicles are, and then you're easily going to have to pay way more for those types of repairs. I mean, a lot of the arguments of becoming homeless so you don't have to rent or pay the mortgage and saving up money just living in your car kind of gets thrown out the window. Another comment from one of you guys: I've been homeless. The folks living in their cars are sacrificing their safety. Another one I don't think people realize too much is also their health.
I lived in my car for 2.5 months around this time last year, and the only things I could eat was McDonald's. Well, afford to eat was McDonald's and Waffle House every single day. It would either be an All-Star or I'll get 2 cheeseburgers and a small fry from McDonald's, and I might add a cookie to that too, you know, if I work hard enough that day. Some nights I'll wake up in the middle of the night because my feet would be frozen cold.
Another person talking about the cold nights living in a car, but you obviously don't have a kitchen, so the only option is to eat out. Majority of the time, that means very unhealthy.
I will say that isn't the only option. It is the easiest option, right? Because you don't have really a space to prepare your food, and you don't have a way to clean up after yourself. So it is really hard. I'm not going to say like it's easy, but there are certain things you can like get at the grocery store and cook. So you can get like canned soups, for example, and eat those. I did a lot of that. Ramen. I did a lot of salad. Like salad is the OG fast food. So if you have a cooler and can hold on to fast food or salad stuff, like it's really not too hard to store, leafy greens, some produce, especially the less perishable types of produce, fruits and apples and berries and that kind of stuff, nuts. You can do that. So it is doable, but kind of like what I was saying before, you don't feel like you really exist, or at least I didn't, and it can get dull after a while. So that is a little, stressful. I will say, when I was living in Jackson, one of the things they had like a no questions asked food pantry, and it wasn't like a food bank. It was just like this small house, kind of towards downtown, where all the restaurants would bring their leftover food. So you could get day old croissants, and like the Whole Foods in town would donate prepackaged meals there as well, because they can't give those out to and food banks. So I mean, this is a pro tip. If you are in a situation where you need to live out of your car for a period of time, and you're able to do so, I would go volunteer at a food bank. I also did that when I lived in North Carolina, and so there, Whole Foods would make donations, but things like the pastries and like the prepackaged foods, they weren't allowed to give out to as part of like the boxes to the families picking them up. So as a volunteer, you got to take those. So if you're in a situation where the food bank or the food pantry or whatever can give you those for free, no questions asked, or you can volunteer. I mean, that's an easy way too to get access to decent food. If you can get like day old sandwiches and that kind of stuff, I think that can help offset it. But yeah, I mean, for a lot of people, the easiest option is gonna be fast food, and I think we all know that's not the healthiest option.
I mean, the cheapest things you could find, the Waffle House, McDonald's, which again now in 2025 are not cheap, going over the cost of living. Waffle House, I believe, doubled in price. And we saw another clip of a single like sausage, egg, and cheese sandwich from McDonald's being like $7.50. Just adding on to the fact that you probably won't save as much money as you think, even if you are literally homeless. And unless you actually go and work out at the gym while you shower every day, that's a pretty unhealthy lifestyle. You're not moving around, you're literally sitting in a seat. That could have some really bad long-term effects for people as well. And I've seen some comments like this from you guys, I gave up. I've accepted my retirement and will be living in a car, which I know some people will say and not take it too seriously. I mean, there's a clip like this.
I live in my car because the cost of living in America is just too high. So I get questions like this, like, what am I going to do if my car busts? Which I feel like is a weird way of phrasing that. But if my car does break down, I'll just get it fixed. And if it's a repair that costs more than $1,000, then I am just going to get rid of the car and then move to Europe and start a new life there.
So there's clips like this that don't really take it too seriously, not thinking it through. How could he say calmly, I'm going to move to Europe, like everything is free there? Many places in Europe, it's just as bad, honestly. Have you considered working on a cruise ship? You could have accommodation and food provided. Not an easy job, but saves a lot. Maybe a good piece of advice from that comment. I've never thought of it. Do you think living in Europe is cheap? Again, the other reason why I didn't think this was super seriously, you can see all the other comments, the mic clipped to the neck. Eating a block of cheese is crazy. The mic, even though he wasn't wrong overall, how difficult it is to survive today, still doesn't look like some of the rough situations we saw previously. We have another comment from one of you guys. I've been on a content kick of watching people living van life. They're traveling, seeing the world, making memories, and not paying rent. Shows that you could have an experience and save for the future. I don't know how much I agree with the last statement now, because once you start looking into a lot of the van life videos, especially the influencers that'll always make it look like it's the highlights. It's amazing, it's a house on wheels, and I'm not paying rent, so I'm saving so much money, and it's not as easy as most of these influencers make it look.
I just found out I'm getting kicked out of this apartment in 4 months. And instead of just looking for another boring apartment,
I actually went for my dream. My name is Andy, I'm 31 years old, and I've always dreamed of van life.
Now, I'm not trying to hate on this guy. He chose to live in a van. It's not because he had absolutely no money and no other option. He ended up getting one of the Sprinter vans, which is probably the most popular for van life. In the end, though, it is a Mercedes van, very expensive. There are many different models and lengths, but it's around $50,000 for these vans, just to start, by the way. If you know what you're doing, a lot of DIY could save you some money, but I think a majority of people don't know how to do this, so clearly that's going to cost you quite a bit more.
Yeah, this was my hiccup, and this is why I ended up living in a Subaru Outback instead of doing the van life, because I just couldn't afford. You couldn't afford it, and a lot of people are like, oh, well, rent is too high. Rent is high. Okay, but if you have to buy a $50,000 Sprinter or, van or whatever, and convert it and all that kind of stuff, and you're going to put in decent money, like, my perspective with van life was, if you're going to make it a full-time thing and do it for a while, you should probably invest in stuff you want to, like high quality stuff or higher quality stuff than you might otherwise give yourself. So you want to splurge a little bit, right? Because you're going to be living in it full time. And so if you're buying a van for $50,000 and then all the equipment, and if you have to, subcontract out because you don't have expertise, whatever, you're looking probably at a 70, 75, maybe $80,000 conversion when all is said and done. And that is gonna basically be your rent, right? So yeah, you might not be paying $2,000 rent anymore, but you're still paying $1,000 or whatever on car payment, insurance, anything you had to finance to put into the vehicle. Like, it's a lot more than people realize. So I will give him credit here where he's calling it out. Like, I think van life is shown in a positive light on social media because a lot of those people who are doing it are trying to be influencers. They're trying to capitalize on travel, and the entire travel industry on social media is very aspirational. It only shows you the good stuff. And that's because you have people who are selling merchandise and products and sponsorships and all that kind of stuff in order to present a certain aesthetic. And that's why you see a lot of sameness with the van life stuff, right? You see a lot of young people converting, Sprinter vans, and they look really nice, aesthetically pleasing, but it's not really realistic. It's like, I'll give you an example, right? So you see all these pictures of people, opening the back of their vans, and they're drinking their morning coffee and overlooking the beach, and it's like, oh, this is wonderful, this is great. Okay, so I drove up Highway 1 on California's coast into Oregon, and it was nice, except for there was no cell service. It was really windy, and because there was no cell service, it was really hard to figure out where it was okay to park. There was an app I was using at the time, which kind of was like a crowdsourced list of okay places to camp at. And one of the things I will say is, over time, acceptability of boondockers and van lifers and people living in their cars, the toleration of that with different businesses and different towns even has declined over time. So there was this app I was using, and it was basically a travel log. So you would put the date, and you'd put like what your experience was at a particular location, and you could see people in 2017, for example, had parked at a Walmart parking lot, said it was great, and then by 2021, by the time I'd gone there, they'd put signs up, no one was allowed, they would call the police, that kind of stuff. And so I would use that app to find places. Well, if you're driving on the coast, right, and there's no cell service, it's really hard to find a place to park and verify that it's okay to park there. And as a solo female traveling, that was a rule of mine. I wanted to always verify that a place was okay before I stay there, that other people had been there. I tried to park where other people were also parking, so there was kind of like a safety and numbers aspect to it, and I just felt safer when I was around other people. But that's a great example. Like, people just make it on social media that they portray an image of van life that isn't accurate with reality. There's aspects of it they don't talk about. Not having cell service on the beach is just one of them. Maybe, that tickles your fancy, but for some people, it's a logistical nightmare.
Another comment from one of you guys: always love the whole van life thing. Something like $80,000 to even get started to live. So this is a very different situation of people becoming homeless and living in the 2006 Accord like we saw earlier. Most of these clips are by choice, just to be able to travel the country, most of the time, seeing monuments, seeing the national parks, going all over because they had a work from home job. So all they really needed was a laptop and they could do whatever they want. Again, not trying to hate on any of these people. I'm just saying it's not cheap in the end, especially some of the clips on screen.
Oh, I will add too, there obviously are people doing this. There's retirees that live in RVs and they travel full time. So that's a totally different niche than houseless people. The people who are traveling full time as well, they'll have like really nice, like custom vans like this. They'll often have hookups. And so some will camp in dispersed land, so just open public land, campsites on Bureau of Land Management land or national forest. But all these people will also go to campgrounds, and those aren't cheap either. You could, look at $25, $30, $40 a night for a campground, depending on where you are, and that adds up really quickly. So again, if you're paying the the car note and any sort of expenses you had to finance to build out the van. And then if you're choosing to park in paid spots, so at campgrounds, like it's basically your rent. It just looks different on your budget, but it's still the same cost. Like, you might not actually be saving as much as you think you are.
When they start really heavily renovating all of these vans, I mean, it really does look like a living room. Super, super nice, but very expensive. Here we have a description for one of these Sprinter vans. Would you pay $218,000 for this decked out van? You're paying supercar prices for these vans. So again, very, very different situation. I think some people start blending the RV life and actually being homeless living in their vehicle together, when in reality, it's just not the same. You even have other creators showing that the RV van life isn't nearly as good as the influencers make it out to be.
Okay, so it's that time of the year where I make a video on how much van life sucks, and let me de-influence you from it for just a moment.
First up, it's honestly pretty gross at times. Well, actually a lot. Depending on your build setup, you're frequently handling your own waste and dirty sink water, which tends to smell pretty bad. Plus, you have to constantly find places to dump these items. Oh, and I almost guarantee you'll have an instance where either your pee or gray water tank spills inside the van. Second, your entire home is going through constant earthquakes when you drive down bumpy roads. So stuff breaks often and you gotta figure out how to fix it or find someone who does. Which also, if your van goes into the shop, you're without a home for who knows how long. It will force you to get real good at going with the flow because your plans will get disrupted all the time. That spot you thought you were gonna park for the night, not allowed anymore. The location you're going to fill up on water, closed. The plan you had for your day, scratch it because it took you almost all day to do basic chores. It can be a very unstable and inconsistent life, but to me, the pros heavily outweigh the cons.
So imagine all of those problems happening and you don't have a large van where at least you kind of have a whole bedroom and a little bit of space to move around compared to this clip.
Hey everybody, my name is Tyler, and because of the out of control inflation that we're having in our country right now and rent prices being over $1,500 a month, I have been outpriced at the rental market, and I live here in my car full time, and I wanted to give you a brief tour. So starting with the bed here, it is a 3-inch memory foam mattress topper, super comfortable. I have about 4 layers of blankets, which keeps me warm, especially right now we've got 20-degree weather at night, so it's pretty cold. Moving over here, I have my cooler. I've had a few people tell me I'm not supposed to have this cooler because I live in my car, but it actually was a birthday gift last year for my 30th birthday, and I just can't part with it. I absolutely love it. Keeps all my food cold and fresh for days. I absolutely just adore this cooler, so I'm not going to get rid of it. And in the back there, you can see I have 2 really comfortable pillows.
There is a massive difference between living in one of these Sprinter vans and the back of his car right there. And because he was lucky enough to get the Yeti cooler for a birthday gift, he wouldn't really have much else other than the memory foam bed.
I would invest in a Yeti. I know this is a controversial take, especially if you don't have a lot of money. But there's certain things worth investing in, and if you're gonna do the whole Carlife thing, or you are facing homelessness and you have some money, like you can't afford a $1,500 rent, but you have some discretionary income to spend, I would invest in a Yeti. I think it's totally worth it, and if you need to keep food, like I think that's the best way to do it.
really, really rough situations. He even said it was because of the inflation and the high cost of living. He just couldn't afford it, and he was over 30 years old. Another comment from one of you guys: living in your car is terrifying just in terms of finding parking, not getting harassed by police, safety, and having absolutely nothing to do and going literally insane. You're homeless. I've been there not by choice. If you have any other choice, do not make yourself homeless. Even if you try to apply for apartments, you'll have gaps in your rental history that they will use to
Okay, two comments on this. The rental history gap, I completely did not know about that when I lived in my car. And so that actually, has impacted my housing ever since then. Because the only apartment I was able to get after that was like a super shady one. And it was in my hometown, and my mom was able to vouch for me. But every other apartment I've had a roommate, or I've rented from someone else who's the primary tenant. And so this is a big thing, and people don't talk about it, is if you have gaps in your rental history, um, the apartment complexes will look at you the same way, an employer might look at a job gap, and no one talks about that. It's never discussed. But that is kind of important. If you decide, okay, this life isn't for me, you do it for a few months and you want to move back to an apartment, you might not have the option to do so. And then with regard to like safety and being harassed by the police, I was only harassed by the police, I think 3 times. Ironically, the one time this really made me angry. I had just gotten into Jackson, had like set up my job with the Parks and Rec, but I hadn't gotten my permit yet to camp in their parking lot. Like that day I was gonna start my job with the balloon, hot air balloon chasing, and then that afternoon I was gonna get my parking permit. And so probably around 3 o'clock in the morning, I was parked on a street with a couple other like campers and van life people. And the cops like knocked at 3 o'clock in the morning and were like telling me to move. And literally, not even kidding you, was scheduled to start working at the hot air balloon company at 5 o'clock that morning. So I had like, 2 hours left until I had to show up to work anyways. And that experience really hit home because, again, I had just showed up in this random town, didn't know anything about it. They had a housing crisis, like a very acute housing crisis. They didn't have enough workers to really fund their economy. Like, talk about the hand that feeds you. Like, I don't know how Jackson is going to make it because you have all like this super high end stuff and you don't have the people and the service industry to provide the services that people are paying a premium for. And so like I was there meeting the needs of that community and just kind of, I got the job that I got jobs I wanted, and they got, staff to meet their needs. And you had the police going around because you had NIMBY neighbors who they don't want to see poor people, right? They don't want to see poor people, and they want to go to the nice restaurants. They want to have the nice experiences, but they don't want to encounter or see the people that make those experiences possible. And they don't want to concede that, oh, my nice dinner, well, that came at the cost of housing for this chef or this waiter. And that's why I counted a lot in Austin. A lot of the people who would come to the rec center because they were living in vehicles, they were back of house, front of house servers and in restaurants, because they either couldn't afford housing or they just didn't have access to it because, there just wasn't any. And people were literally, spending $800,000, $900,000 a month to live on a couch in someone's living room. There just wasn't any housing. But the police part was really, it's something that lingers in the back of your mind. It's like every time you park somewhere, it's like, oh, I hope I don't get, I hope I don't get found out. I hope, everything's okay. Because that is a scary part, is like, if you are somewhere and the police come at the middle of the night, it's like, okay, well, where do you go? Right. And I've had that happen where it's like, okay, well, where do I go now? And that is unsettling because you don't just want to, I mean, depending on where you are, right? But like, you don't want to just park on the side of the road somewhere. Not all businesses are acceptable anymore. I spent a lot of time camping in Cracker Barrel parking lots, believe it or not. But that might be changing soon. I don't know. I don't know if they still, allow that. So it's something to really think about. Like, you are seen as a vagrant. Like the moment, and this is what's an important distinction here, is you have actual homeless people, like the crackheads on the street who are out of their mind, crazy, a real public nuisance. You have people who live in vehicles, people who live in pay by the week hotels, people who have been, locked out of the housing market for one reason or another, have looked for alternative means, and they're treated the same, probably worse, to be honest, treated worse than the druggies and all the crazy people out on the street. Like, the people on the street have no shame. They're allowed to commit crimes. Like, they're released. They have all these nonprofits catering to every beck and whim. They have free showers, free healthcare. They have whatever they want, you know. If they gave up drugs, they would have free housing. Like, the people living in vans and the people living in pay-by-the-week hotels, like, they don't have that. They're actual, like, hardworking people struggling to survive. And then, of course, like, you have the van life people at the higher end who are trying to make it look nice. And all three are kind of the same class of unhoused, nomadic type people. But depending on where you sit socioeconomically on that range, you're treated very differently. And it's just, I don't know, it left a really bad taste in my mouth when the Jackson police, like, yelled at me at 3 o'clock in the morning and told me to move. It's like, I'm trying to help your community here. Like, why are you taking this out on me? I'm not a bad person. I'm, like, contributing. I'm buying stuff, paying, you know, sales tax and all that kind of stuff. Like, I'm contributing to your economy. I'm not a nuisance. But we kind of, like, lump everyone together as, like, being a nuisance. And then the ones who are the nuisance, like, we're not doing anything about it, because the moment that you solve actual homelessness, like, well, not actual, but, like, you solve the problems you see on, like, Skid Row and in downtown cities, the nonprofit homeless industrial complex, all those people suddenly are jobless. So they have a strong incentive to keep the charade of helping people go on, while the actual people who do need help don't get the help they need because they, you know, make too much money. For example, like the guy that was at the grocery store, he's working a job and makes too much money to qualify for EBT, but he can't afford housing, you know. So there's just these irreconcilable paradoxes that are caught up in all of this as well.
To disqualify you. That could be a problem as well down the road. But if you don't have enough money, you don't have enough money, what else are you going to do? And I don't know 100% about where you can and cannot park. I think a lot of areas in general, you're not supposed to overnight park, especially if you're living there. I believe Walmart is one of the places you're allowed to, but don't quote me on that. I'm not 100% sure. So along with all of the issues, having to go to the bathroom, clearly having no space for yourself and the few belongings you still do have, the freezing cold nights or the really warm weather, same thing in the summer, could be unbelievably hot. Each night you have to stealth camp, which we'll see in a second, to hide the fact that you're sleeping in your own vehicle, just so you don't get in trouble.
So right now I am in a casino parking lot sleeping tonight, and I want to be kind of stealthy. So I put up all my window covers and I try to make it look like there's no one living in the van. So I'm going to show you how I do that. First thing I like to do is make sure I put all of the window covers up on all of the windows in the van. Already up in the back here and on the side, and then I'm going to put them up in the front as well. And then I make sure that I have all of my, like, chores done before I camp at a spot like this. So I emptied out the gray water a couple days ago. I took out the trash today. I went grocery shopping. So I really have no reason to even leave the van for the rest of the night. With all the window covers up, for the most part, it's pretty blocked out. When it gets super dark out, you can kind of see through this side curtain here. So I like to turn the lights off. I have these string lights that are just, you know, not as bright. So I like to use those at night.
So throughout all this video, what many people are doing with all of their different situations, you can see the extra things that they have to purchase just to be able to do this. Again, adding into the sentiment that you don't actually save as much money as you think. Now, of course, if you're paying $2,000 or $2,500, even $3,000 a month for one of these crazy apartments that are probably luxury or modern, but they're still crap, overall, I bet you'd save money year after year. But a lot of negatives come with this. The safety, being really cold or really hot, having to hide that you're staying and sleeping in the vehicle so you don't get in trouble. I mean, it's just a terrible, terrible situation. We have another comment from one of you guys. I'm in Oregon and places to live are unaffordable here. This goes for buying and renting. We have a huge homelessness problem here. I wonder why. Oregon and Washington State are incredibly expensive. I know it's very nice there. There's a lot of forests. It's pretty. I just remember looking up some of the housing over there. It's incredibly expensive. And to add on to the homelessness problem, if you're lucky enough to have a vehicle, you're very up north. Those winters are rough. So you're going to have to buy even more things just to be able to survive the night like this.
How do I stay warm living in my car in the cold of Vermont fall and the cold 17 degrees of winter in North Carolina? First, let's talk bedding. So I have 3 layers on my bed. I have my sleeping bag, a super heavy fuzzy blanket that is folded over so it acts as 2 layers, and then I have my comforter that is folded over that also acts as 2 layers. My sleeping bag, unfortunately, is only to 35 degrees, which means comfortable sleeping is 45 degrees. Then, of course, layers upon layers upon layers upon layers. Other things I have done are Reflectic for window covers. Reflectix keeps your windows a little bit insulated so the cold air doesn't seep in.
And all of this still costs money. We could look at one of the comments here. My question is about needing a bathroom. We could look at the response from her.
I had so many questions in that video about how do I use the bathroom while living in my car. And especially as a girl with stomach issues, this is how I use the bathroom while living in my car. 1, state the obvious, public restrooms. pretty accessible anywhere you go to find a public restroom. Then when I'm camping in the woods, I just go out in the woods. If I have to go poo, I can dig a hole and poo in a hole and then cover it up. But my preferred method when I'm out in the woods is to use this little pop-up camper toilet. I basically unfold it, put it up, put a plastic bag in it, and then sit on it and use the bathroom. And then I throw away my poo in a dumpster or a garbage can.
I'd probably say not the ideal situation for most, but there's a lot of people with no other options, and it doesn't really look to be getting too much better. I mean, maybe you could possibly hope that at least right now, with the economy really not looking too good and everybody agreeing upon that if we do go into a recession, maybe housing prices and rental prices will start going down. Definitely not a guarantee when we've just seen everything increase in price over the past 5 years, basically no matter what. So in the end, none of us really know what's actually going to happen. And even though all of the examples we've seen previously have been because of the high cost of living, that's not the only reason why some people are becoming homeless.
I have a lot of debt, and I am currently living out of my leased car. I just threw a
leased car and just live. Okay.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
So you're currently homeless.
Yeah, currently homeless.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Well, how long have you been?
It's only been like 3 weeks.
Wow, what happened 3 weeks ago?
So what happened 3 weeks ago is the guys whose room I was renting out, he ended up selling his property and kicked me out. And because I have no saved money, I couldn't even afford a down payment for another place.
And of course, this is somebody on the financial audit had.
So this is, I think, something that's really important. Kind of underscores what I was saying before with the gap in your housing record, and it's something that is not talked about nearly enough. So when you rent, you don't just put down. Well, it varies from place to place, right? Like I've lived places where you put down first last deposit, you put down just a deposit that's equivalent to the price of rent, or they have a separate security deposit, right? But the costs vary, and depending on where you are and like the market you're in, it can be super expensive. So when I lived in DC, it was first last, and then a lot of places would screen you, and you had to make 30 times the rent to be able to live there. So if the rent was $3,000 a month, you would have to make a salary of at least $90,000 in order to qualify. So if you're, like a lot of folks just getting started in their careers, you're not making that, right? So you'll get locked out of housing that way. And that's what puts people into situations like this guy, where he was renting from some random person. So you have a lot of illegal leases that are happening. And so depending on the laws in your local area, especially tenant laws, if you have an informal contract or not even a contract at all, just an informal housing arrangement where you're paying someone to rent a room in their house, we don't really have a lease, they're not really your landlord, they can kick you to the curb at a moment's notice. If you don't have the minimum to qualify for housing in certain areas, like you won't have access to certain types of housing. And then if you don't have first and last rent, so if you rent an apartment for $3,000 a month and you need first and last and say a deposit, that's what, $9,000 right up front. So a lot of people don't even have that. And then if you have gaps, that will impact it. And then also your credit score. They do credit checks as well. Because again, you have to think of an apartment complex like an investment property, because that's what it is. They want a return on your investment. You are providing them with a monthly revenue stream. And if you have a poor credit history, they're not going to want to rent to you. And so people who have been not paying their debt because after COVID, especially student loans, people who are now seeing their unpaid and defaulted debts show up on their credit reports, that's going to lock you out of housing. I think a lot of people, and I get it, I'm not blaming these people, they say, what's the point? I have no equity in this future, this country. Why would I pay my debts? Like, I'm just going to, deal with the consequences later. Well, one of those consequences is getting locked out of housing. So you definitely won't qualify for a mortgage, right? If you have a terrible credit score, but it can also affect your access to an apartment rental, right? And so if you get locked out of those, okay, your options are informal agreements, renting from families, which are becoming harder and harder to do because you just, not as many families have, rental properties anymore. Living in your car, renting by the week hotels. So you lose access to housing. And so I think that's part of this too. It's not even just the cost for some people. Cost is definitely a driver. It's all these other components as well, because the housing market itself has become so highly financialized. And so people really need to start considering the consequences of their actions as it relates to housing. Because this is, I think that's the one thing I think most people need. You need access to housing and some sort of stability in order to succeed, whether that's career, relationship, whatever. You need that. And if you don't have housing as a cornerstone, you're going to struggle. You really will.
has a ton of debt and nothing saved. So if anything goes wrong with the people we talk about on the credit card debt videos, any of the doom spending that we've gone over on this channel, there are no other options. Another interesting comment from one of you guys, especially if you start looking up any of these videos in this space, a lot of the times there'll be a comment where some guy or girl saying that they were broke and homeless, but now to such and such person, they earn thousands of dollars every week. And you got to know that this is utter BS. So in the comment sections of some of these videos showing how they're basically barely surviving living in their vehicles, they'll have bot comments or just spam comments saying that they were homeless too, but now they're making millions because of insert guru's name here. It's all complete lies. It's just a way to funnel people into another grifter that you got to pay for an online course or a mentorship or any of the number of things people try to sell and try to take the very small amount of money that you do have. I mean, it's unbelievable how some people prey upon others with almost nothing. But we're going to end off with this clip, probably another situation we're going to start seeing a little bit more in the future.
They look like tired travelers waiting for a flight, but take a closer look. These people are actually homeless.
Well, since right now I'm completely broke, so I'm not going anywhere, just hiding different parts of the airport.
Rebecca has lived here with her adult son and cat for almost a year. She says the airport is safer than the streets and overcrowded shelters.
I left Phoenix with $15,000. It goes quick.
The job and apartment she had lined up both fell through. Then she lost $3,500 in a rental scam. Broke, she landed at the airport, homeless. She uses the Wi-Fi at the airport to apply for jobs. She did get a job, ironically, here at the airport, doing what she did in Phoenix, pushing passengers in wheelchairs, but was fired a week later. She believes the company found out she was homeless.
So I mean, at the end of the day, I definitely don't have this solution, and I don't really know when this could get too much better, because if you're looking at any of the stuff that's happening with the economy around the world, it only really seems to be getting worse, unfortunately. But that's all I got for you guys today. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. YouTube thinks...
Okay, so yeah, this is obviously escalating as a trend. It's definitely shifted from how it was framed to me on social media when I started doing it, when I did it in 2021. It was definitely framed more in the van life, travel, kind of nomad experience, and now it's I think the economy is really catching up, and people are starting to see that the two are definitely related, and people are starting to live in their cars because they have no other option. So I think, yeah, housing is out of control. Housing is really expensive. It's pushing people to do things. I do think there are options, and people should be aware of them. So, a couple things you can consider. If you do live in a car and you're not physically located to a particular geography, you can move to where the jobs are. So I didn't know this, but a lot of the national parks, for example, until I went to the parks, but a lot of national parks, they have all of these amenities and services. And so they have housing on site for staff. So kind of like one of the comments, go work on a cruise ship. Like, I would get creative and look in the travel industry. Again, if you're not wedded to a particular location, this will work for you. But you can do things like woofing. You can work at a national park or some sort of travel industry. You can look for places where they have housing or access to housing. So like, you can still live in your car, but you can offset it with other types of housing arrangements. So you're not just 100% in your car 100% of the time. And that, because you're also working and you have access to housing, it'll allow you to save up money in a much better way than I think a lot of these people are able to do. If you are looking for housing and you've been priced out of where you are, consider moving. Again, I know this isn't the case or an option that's available to a lot of people, but it is to some. I think we saw, and I think this is part of a bigger trend, but after deindustrialization gutted a lot of jobs in the Rust Belt and across the Midwest, people like me, lots of other people, we went to college and then we moved to big cities, right? And so there was a net out migration from certain parts of the country and a flood of migration into cities, which helped drive up prices. And so I think we should maybe a reverse migration out of cities back into some of these more rural areas could be a solution. I've said this in other videos and I'll keep saying it. Like, where I grew up, where my parents still live to this day, their houses for less than $200,000, and they're decent houses, right? So it is possible. You just have to be willing to move somewhere, and if you have a job you can take with you or a job that is flexible, that could be an option that's available to you. And yeah, I mean, I would just, you can think of it too as a stepping stone. It's not even like, there are some people obviously who do this because they're legitimately homeless. There are other people who I've heard of people, grad students living in vans, people living in Google, like Google employees will live in, converted vans. And I think someone converted like a U-Haul once, in order to save money. So it'll vary from situation to situation, but it can be a strategic way to get towards more permanent housing. If you're a family and you've been priced out of housing, I've seen people who live in RVs or campers. Again, it's not a permanent option, but it's a stepping stone to, a better option. And so I think yes, we can all agree that housing is insane. It's very expensive. But I think there's gonna be people who are gonna be like, "Woe is me. There's nothing I can do. This is my fate," and they're just gonna succumb to the victimhood narrative and be victims to their circumstances. And there's people who are going to see what's happening and use car life and living in a car as a way to leverage them into something different and something better. So I think it's important to be aware this is happening and it's happening more frequently, because it does signal some really bad things about the economy. But again, it's all about perspective and the way you look at it. And I think if people kind of look at the glass half full where they can, and see the opportunities that are kind of hidden in this, they'll come out ahead, I think. So it's all about your framing, right? It's all about your framing. Life gives you lemons, you make lemonade, and if you don't have any sugar, you make lemon flavored water. You just kind of gotta roll with the punches as you can, and yeah. But definitely be aware this is happening, because it really is a good indicator of how a local economy is doing, and kind of what the actual struggle is. It's not what you see with the druggies and the people who are strung out, downtown living on the streets. There's actual people who are quietly suffering, and I don't think they get as much recognition as they realize. Okay, my Mac is about to turn off because I need to go charge it. If you enjoyed this video, I'd love it if you would like and subscribe. And thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.